listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. On today's edition of the Paul McGUIRE Report, we're going to continue to take a deep dive and give you a prophetic analysis, an intelligence analysis that integrates both God's Word, Bible prophecy, and specifically critical hot button issues, critical categories that directly impact your life, my life, and the life of people in America and around the world. So let's begin with asking ourselves the question, why is the nation of Greenland of such apparently vital importance to President Trump and to America? What is it about Greenland in terms of its assets, its geographic position on the globe, its history, its economics? What is it about Greenland that makes it so potentially viable as a geopolitical asset to the United States of America? So let's look at it. And we're going to try to regularly incorporate in the Paul McGUIRE Report more documentation, more facts that are relevant so that you can make up your own mind and make up your own decision. You don't have to be spoon-fed the decision or opinion by the deep state or the globalist elite or the intelligence agencies that often control our major media operations, both mainstream media, intelligence agency controlled, and what's called alternative media is essentially under the control of the intelligence agencies. Now, because of the naivete of Christians, because of the lack of in-depth education by Christians in understanding dynamically the world that we live in, most people, conservatives and Christians, fail to see that the same power paradigm, if you will, that controlled the mass media in the 1940s, the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, and so on, right to our present time period, 2026 and beyond, those same levers, those same hidden mechanisms of control still exist. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to be proverbially sucker punched over and over again with propaganda, with psyops, psychological operations, and other stuff. And at the very least, you're going to be programmed with erroneous information and erroneous facts. So let's look at a few of the things that we need to know regarding Greenland. And we're also going to take a look from a different point of view than on previous programs of Iran, Somalia again, the Dirty Triangle nations, South America, Mexico. All of these nations are in play, and all of these nations directly impact the United States of America in a big way, in a very big way. So let's look at it and discover together what this big way implies. So let's begin at the beginning, where we often go. So Greenland has been in the news a lot lately. 10 years ago and beyond that, it was never brought up. Nobody cared about Greenland. It just didn't. It was like an irrelevant nation. But now Greenland is front and center in the news constantly because President Donald Trump keeps talking about his potential plans, and I think that they're serious plans, his plans to place Greenland or make Greenland one of the United States of America or under the control of the United States of America. And he's been talking about that a lot publicly. So why would Trump, who's not a fool, he's a billionaire businessman, he sees the economic value and the geopolitical value in Greenland. Why? Okay, we're going to take a look at it right now on the Paul McGUIRE Report. Okay, so number one, Greenland has a critical role in America's global strategy, including where Greenland is geographically located, by the way. And Greenland is important to not only the USA as a whole, but because Greenland has a very unique geographic location. Greenland has a very high-profile military value. Greenland is rich, super rich in mineral resources and natural resources. And Greenland plays a very important role in this mysterious Arctic region under the ice. And by that I mean, once upon a time in America, the geographic areas of like Antarctica and the Arctic the Arctic and to the north, Antarctica to the south, the poles. And America would cover that information to a degree, but it would never peel back all the layers and let you see what was really going on. So there's all this talk, and there has been all this talk about secret or semi-secret developments going on in Greenland. I remember, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, approximately 10 years ago, I was talking to a woman who introduced herself to me at a Bible prophecy conference that I was speaking at. And she happened to live in the area around Aspen, Colorado, and Colorado. And so one of the areas that she lived in Colorado was the geographic area where the Canadian super billionaire, Maurice Strong, who was out of Canada. Maurice Strong, and I can quote this stuff like from my memory. I don't have to have a book open. I don't have to be looking at AI. It's just all stored in the endless files in my mind, because things that are of interest to me, things that represent an answer to the puzzle piece that I'm assembling, my mind goes into kind of an autopilot ability to remember things in detail that most people couldn't remember. Now, if the stuff is boring and not relevant to me, then it's garbage in and garbage out. GIGO, the old computer expression. Okay, so Maurice Strong was the Canadian billionaire. He was also one of the heads of the United Nations, one of the heads that developed this UN Agenda 2030 program. He was one of the billionaire pioneers of many of the UN goals for global sustainable development. He also was a big occultist and New Age man. And he bought massive amounts of acres in some of the most pristine areas of Colorado. And he developed these massive acres in Colorado into what was called Baca Ranch. And Baca Ranch became like a nation inside of a nation. It was very hidden. It was very cloistered, if you will, and all kinds of New Age temples and Indian tribes and New Age research institutes and a whole galaxy of New Age occultic upper-level counterculture things were being developed through Maurice Strong's Baca Ranch. So Maurice Strong and a whole bunch of the movers and shakers in our society, billionaires such as himself, Senator John Kerry, other big-time politicians, they were all planning to sail not necessarily sail. It was a luxury liner, the kind that people rent for these palatial vacations around the world. And so they were sponsoring a tour of the Arctic and the hidden regions behind the ice walls. And for some reason, the globalist elite were all really intense on revisiting the Arctic and the hidden areas of the Arctic at this time. So this lady, because of where she lived geographically, because of her zip code, she ended up developing a relationship with Maurice Strong, the Canadian billionaire's wife. And the Canadian billionaire's wife just assumed that this lady, who was a Christian, that this lady was like a fellow insider with her husband, Maurice Strong. So she showed me pictures that nobody had ever seen before, besides herself, of some of the secret facilities that exist in Antarctica. And then she said that she could get me to go on this cruise to the Arctic and join in on this group of global movers and shakers. And I was aware of the fact that when you sail these luxury massive boats into the area, one of the first things that you see at one of your stops is a very tiny, very humble church that probably was built at least 200 years or more ago in the past. And it's a very humble structure. And it has a small library of books. And what she wanted to do was place one of my books, I think it was the book on the New Age and the Global Society. Yeah, it was the book, Who Will Rule the Future? A Resistance to the New World Order. She wanted to place that book by me with that title on the shelves in the sanctuary of this church. And I thought about it and I prayed about it. And if I get the peace of the Lord, and if I get a direction from the Lord, then I will attempt to do whatever the Lord is leading me to do. But even though the invitation seemed real, she seemed real. She apparently did have connections with Maurice Strong's wife, I felt that because of what I did, because of my international reputation in teaching and exposing the New Age movement and globalism, I felt that if I ended up talking to these movers and shakers on this elite cruise to the Arctic, and if anybody looked at the book they were going to put in the church, Who Will Rule the Future, A Resistance to the New World Order, it would have been simultaneous to me walking around with, red emergency flags and waving. I would have called attention to myself. My very presence would have been, noticed by the very high level security that these people have. And by the way, I hadn't even purchased the tickets yet. I could envision the many high level security forces perusing and examining background information on me, none of which I'm ashamed of, none of which is embarrassing in any way. But if you're a militant globalist and if you're pro-globalism and you're an occultist, I don't think you're going to be all that thrilled that a well-known author of books in this area, a guy who's communicated to millions of people, done very major media interviews, et cetera, et cetera. I just didn't, all that data and the fact that as I prayed about it, I didn't have the peace of the Lord. And so thank God I did what I always do in these kinds of situations. When I pray about it and I don't get the peace of the Lord regarding moving into a particular situation, then it's my policy to stop what I'm doing and back off and interpret the lack of peace in my soul to a Lord kind of sending me like the equivalent of a red traffic light. And we all know, hopefully, that when you see a green traffic light, you're permitted legally to move forward. When you see a yellow traffic light, depending on what state you're in, that's a cautionary light. And when you see a red light, it means stop. So the lack of peace in my spirit, plus my rational deductions, I didn't have peace. That meant that I interpreted that to be that the Lord was giving me a red traffic light. So I politely declined the invitation, which would have been just tremendous from just a purely human standpoint. It would have been a gold mine of research for me. But without the peace of the Lord, what good is it? So I declined. And last I heard, she did go onto that cruise, and I assume she got somebody else. But in any case, this stuff that we're talking about is real. Now, Greenland, to a minor degree, it's not necessarily connected to this, outright globalist type of thing. But Greenland is a geographic location that has, as I said earlier, it has enormous relevance and potential for America. Okay, so back to why is Greenland of such vital importance to the United States of America? And this is why President Donald Trump has been talking about it to such a large degree. Notice that Trump seems to be surveying the entire planet Earth, and focusing in on particular geographic areas, nations, and so on and so forth that he considers to be of vital importance to America's future. And he's not playing games. So, first of all, we have to understand that Greenland is absolutely a priority to America's U.S. defense strategies in the global battlefield. It's of incredible importance. Number two is Greenland is essentially a self-governing territory of Denmark. A lot of people don't know that, but it is. And Greenland holds significant geopolitical value to America due to its position at the crossroads of North America, Europe, and yes, the Arctic region. Greenland makes it a pivotal point for controlling all access to the North Atlantic, influencing global trade routes and security dynamics. It's also pivotal in scientific research regarding the melting of the icebergs and things like that, whether you believe in global warming or not. And Greenland, and he or the nation that controls Greenland ends up controlling what is called a transpolar sea route, which can emerge, potentially shortening the transit times, the import times, the export times of products and services between East Asia and Western Europe by shortening the distance by thousands of miles. Therefore, control over Greenland would give the United States a military and economic and geopolitical dominance over all these areas. And so it's not by any means an irrelevant or useless nation. So, in addition to that, this U.S. dominance over these trade routes could help undo Russian and Chinese expansion in the Arctic. If you look at pictures of the Arctic or Antarctica, you will see, especially in the Arctic, all these bases, and they don't overtly look like military bases, but they look like they're owned by corporations. But nations like Russia, there are European nations, and Chinese and China, communist China, has major operations going on in the Arctic and in Greenland. And President Trump also wants it because Greenland can play a key role in blocking adversaries or enemies of the United States of America and allow for a stronger U.S. influence over that of Russia or China, which wants to increase the number of footholds that they control. So Trump has been talking about, along with these Venezuelan operations where he took out the dictator of Venezuela, Maduro, and has essentially taken over the government. When he was conducting these military operations, he made public his discussions regarding using economic pressure or military means to reshape the infamous, I'm using the term infamous, NATO dynamics. And what is NATO? NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's essentially a world military arm. NATO is a world military arm largely financed by the United States of America, or at least it has been in the past. And even though the European nations, especially Western Europe, the European nations are the beneficiaries of NATO because NATO provides a strong military defense against any military aspirations that Russia might have. In fact, NATO is Europe's primary defense against a potential Russian invasion. But the problem with NATO is the European nations get all the benefit and the United States of America just continues to foot the bill, which is not, as if you look at Trump's belief systems, this is not the kind of thing that he supports. He wants Europe to finance NATO. He wants Europe to come to their own defense, not sponge off the assets of America. So there's very interestingly, there's a space base located in Greenland, a place where rockets can go into the sky and go into outer space from the nation of Greenland. Now, this is very interesting, and those of you that follow the research that I've been doing for a long time, the name of this space base in Greenland is called, and it's hard for me to pronounce, Pitufik Space Base. But its former name was the Thule Air Base, Thule as in Thule. Thule is the name of the occultic German secret society. There are like 3 super powerful German occult secret societies that helped guide and shaped and control the rise of Nazi Germany and Germany itself. And one of these secret societies in Germany was called Thule, the Thule Society, Thule. And there are bases, Thule has bases not only at the Thule Air Base, which is a space base now formerly called the Thule Air Base, but in the Arctic itself, you see buildings with the giant insignias of Thule, the German occultic secret society. So it's interesting because the whole Nazi space rocket program, Werner von Braun, NASA, the Thule Society, the fact, and I've done research, I have a lot of research on the Thule Society, NASA, Werner von Braun, the secret space program, and all that stuff in my books available to you at paulmcguire.us. Books like A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and 2. Other books, I go into a deep dive on the occult, the Nazis, and secret occult organizations like Thule. Now, these space bases, like the Tufik space base on Greenland, this has multiple purposes. It happens to be the northernmost U.S. military institution, and it serves as a hub missile launching place, an early warning launching place for defense and, yes, space surveillance. That means space surveillance of monitoring what's happening down on planet Earth via a satellite POV, or surveying other satellites, other rockets, and other potential military space operations from other nations like China. So space surveillance is a big part of what the Tufik space base is all about. Now, there is a term which is called the GIUK gap, which means the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom gap, and this is a critical choke point for anti-submarine warfare, that where Russia or Germany or other nations might be secretly sending in really high-powered nuclear submarines, state-of-the-art nuclear submarines, and especially Russia, which has been caught, as you know from listening to this program, the Paul McGUIRE Report. In the last 10 or 15 years, Russia was caught numerous times sending its elite high-powered nuclear submarines, and each of these submarines have many, many nuclear missiles on these submarines with multiple nuclear warheads. So Russia sent the elite nuclear submarines, theirs. They sent it to patrol deep underwater up and down the Pacific coast, which is the east coast of America, obviously, and the Russian nuclear submarines were secretly patrolling deep underwater the west coast of America, which would be, as you know, the Pacific coast. So Russian nuclear submarines, and they may still be patrolling, for crying out loud. They were patrolling up and down the east coast and the west coast of America with numerous Russian nuclear submarines. And then Russia had the audacity, the in-your-face audacity, and I think this was under the Biden administration as well as the Obama administration. Russia sent in their high-powered nuclear submarines deep underwater. They sent multiple nuclear submarines deep underwater into the Gulf of Mexico. And these nuclear submarines camped out for extended periods of time on the ocean floor of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, I don't understand their requirements in terms of how often they have to come up for air or any of that. But the point is, they were down there for they were down there. When I say down there, I'm talking about down there on the ocean floor in the Gulf of Mexico. They were down there for 6 months or more. And obviously they had to get air or whatever. And America, and some say they were down there for as much as a year or more. And America, at least publicly, America seemed to have no clue that the Russians were patrolling the Gulf of Mexico and the East Coast and the West Coast. It's hard for me to believe that America, no matter what America said publicly, it's hard for me to believe that with America's highly advanced technology, that it did not know of the existence of Russian elite nuclear submarines in these areas. Okay, but this Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom checkpoint, which is located on Greenland, is one further way that America can restrict some elite submarine and naval movements in the North Atlantic and the Arctic areas. So this is like a power rivalry, because Greenland enhances U.S. continental defense. Greenland strengthens NATO's defense of Europe from Russia, and it keeps in check what are called the Russian bastion strategies in the high north. And so Greenland is also the location for very high-level military and defense technology, like massive, elaborate radar systems and sensors, which are absolutely critical for detecting ballistic missile launches the moment a ballistic missile is launched. And I don't know what you call it, that door or window. It's a metallic door or window. I'm sure it has a unique name. On these submarines, you've seen them in in Hollywood movies. So a panel slides open electronically, and then you see these ballistic missiles shoot out of the submarine, the elite Russian submarine, and then these ballistic missiles shoot out into the water, and then they leave a trail behind them, and they shoot up into the water, and then they shoot out of the water. But the moment these ballistic missiles leave the submarine bay where the missiles are stored ready to be fired, the moment that mechanical action takes place, our cutting edge technology is tracking it. It's tracking it instantaneously. And what gives us the ability to track it instantaneously is our geographic positioning. When you have geographic positioning in Greenland, you've now moved your accountability factors, hundreds and thousands of miles closer to the technology that represents a threat. In this case, we're talking about submarines. So, in addition to that, the Greenland being an asset for America in terms of military defense, there's also the need for the Arctic region. The Arctic region is currently being militarized by some of the nations that have an adversarial relationship to America, like Russia and Communist China. So now we go to the area of energy and resource importance. And Greenland, you wouldn't think that a relatively small, it's not all that small, it just seems small because you never hear about it. Greenland has vast untapped resources and minerals and all kinds of natural assets. And it is critical for the U.S., for U.S. security, military security. It is critical for America to be able to work with and perhaps control Greenland in these areas. Greenland is rich in rare earth minerals, which, of course, as you know, is absolutely mandatory for electronics, computers, digital technology, all the new AI technology. All of these technologies are driven by access to rare earth minerals. That's why Elon Musk is so intensely interested, for a multiplicity of reasons. He wants to travel or send rockets and robots to Mars because they've already determined that Mars is rich in these rare minerals and rare substances that are also essential for our computer technology and AI technology. So Greenland is very important because, no matter how you slice it, going to Mars and back is going to be costly. Going to Greenland and back, especially if you control Greenland, is nowhere near as costly. So these are some of the reasons that America is interested in Greenland for the present moment and in the future. So Greenland, think of the big picture. Don't think of just small isolated compartments of geopolitical planning. Think of the big picture. What is Trump doing in the big picture on planet Earth in relationship to America? We see he is very concerned about strengthening America economically, militarily, in terms of natural resources, in nations that were somehow ignored by previous administrations. All of this, by the way, all these nations, Greenland is just one, all of these nations in the Arctic region also have enormous economic value. They have economic value that it will not take that long for the economic yield just from Greenland alone to amount to trillions and trillions of dollars over time. So these things are major assets economically, and therefore they're major assets militarily. All right, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us, and we will be back in just a moment. Once again, you are listening to the Paul McGuire Report. As a matter of interest, the U.S. military organizational structure, which controls some of the regions like Greenland and the Arctic region that I just talked about to you, and even larger territories than that. These are the top of the pyramid, so to speak, in terms of the U.S. military's global control and global defense of America. So there is an organization, most of you have probably heard of it. It is called the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD. a common dual-hatted role by the NORTHCOM leader. So we're talking about NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. And there's a general, now this is the general who's in charge of it at this particular moment in time. As of January 16th, 2026, the commander of the U.S. Northern Command, U.S. NORTHCOM, is General Gregory M. Guillot of the U.S. Air Force. He also concurrently serves as the commander of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. Okay, so this guy has a prestigious military career. He went to the Naval War College and is responsible for massive military defense. Now, I'm talking about this because many, many moons ago, when I was doing a lot of interviews for the Paul McGUIRE Show, the nationally syndicated AM and FM radio talk show that I hosted, the Paul McGUIRE Show. And I had people that would book my guests, and many times I would call. If it was an important guest, I would often call that guest myself because I wanted it to be handled like diplomatically and with tender, loving care. Okay, so that's the way, obviously, as you know, that's the way you would get the biggest guests available, the most interesting guests available to come on your show. You have to treat them right. And you don't want to turn it over to somebody that is not as invested in that process. So anyway, one of my producers had arranged a long time ago for me to do regular interviews with not only high up U.S. military generals in all branches of the armed services. They would arrange for me to have in-depth interviews with high up military leaders and military generals in all branches of the U.S. military. In addition to that, they would have me regularly interview just your regular soldier, your newly enlisted soldier, your regular soldier, and soldiers that have an important function to carry out, but they're not organizationally in terms of their ranking, they're not anywhere near the same status. But we would do, to keep our integrity, we would do like the high-powered generals, and we would do like the regular type soldiers. We would do both. So I remember a producer was getting me hooked up to do an interview with somebody at the North American Defense Command, NORAD. And what was weird was it was a general. I would say it was a general, and I'm not in the military. I'm not exactly precise with every different distinction in military ranking. But it was my appraisal that the individual I was going to interview was very high up in the military's chain of command, but that this individual was not at the very top of the NORAD command, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. This individual that I was supposed to interview was not at the very top. He was several ranks below this guy. Now, the guy, the highest ranked guy. So what happened was, as I'm on hold, waiting for the military officer to do the interview live on the Paul McGUIRE Show, as I'm waiting, as I'm on hold, somebody on their side, somebody at NORAD must have accidentally I didn't find all this out until later, but somebody must have accidentally connected me to not the person I was supposed to be interviewing. They accidentally connected me to the very top dog, so to speak, of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. So, and not only that, it wasn't like his business military phone. It appeared to be, especially in the way he answered the phone vocally, it appeared to be like a very private number that was only given to a few people, maybe maybe the president of the United States, maybe his wife, I don't know. I was being connected to not like a normally official number. It was like through a series of accidents, I was being plugged into a phone in which he directly answered the phone. And the way he directly answered the phone kind of revealed to me that I was on a private personal line, which he didn't expect, the host of a radio talk show to be calling him on his private personal line. So whoever pressed the wrong button by accident ended up connecting me to the top U.S. Northern Command, U.S. NORTHCOM general, and the very top person. So normally, if I was from Fox News Network, if I was from the New York Times, the Washington Post, you name it, nobody, I don't care how high up you might have been in the chain of command in the media or the military, you don't end up talking personally to the very top commander of Northcom. They're just too busy. I mean, they have like incredibly high pressure jobs, and they don't take like regular calls. So because somebody punched me into his private quarters directly, I get him. He was surprised that he was talking to me, and but he was a professional, so he acted like everything was fine, and essentially it was. But you weren't. I wasn't supposed to be talking to him, so I ended up getting a very rare interview with the top military commander of NORAD, and it was a much more interesting interview than I would have normally gotten. And it all had to do with the mistake one or two people made in connecting me and not connecting me to the proper person and connecting me to the private number of the very top general in command of Northcom. So what's my point? My point is, when you commit your way to the Lord on a regular basis, when you commit your way to the Lord on a regular basis, you will find that the blessing of the Lord goes upon your work. And I believe in this case, it was literally the blessing of the Lord which caused somebody to connect me to the wrong general and connect me to somebody who was much higher up on the totem pole and who was available to talk to me and willing to talk to me, which is unusual anyway. And so I believe the reason I got that very rare interview, which was far more interesting than it would have been normally, was because of the blessing of the Lord. But the blessing of the Lord came to me as if it was an accident. I mean, at first, when I first heard the phone kind of bouncing around in his hand when he answered, and there was a certain minor gruffness in his voice, I thought I was going to have to apologize for intruding on somebody's space in an unwarranted manner. But that was not the case. The Lord was blessing me with a much more insightful interview. So I'm saying that to just share with you the principle that when you commit your way to the Lord, you can expect the Lord to bless you. And sometimes these blessings come in unexpected ways that you would never have thought they would come. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Now let's go back to NORAD and the whole purpose of this Northern Command situation. Why? First of all, it's a hemispheric command. The total amount of territory that we're talking about under NORAD is like phenomenal. It's a massive territory of command. Submarines, jets, aircraft carriers. I mean, that's just the beginning of what that command entails. Again, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. One of the things that I tried to do over the years of interfacing with people in the media, some of them who occupied incredibly high positions of power, I would attempt to develop within the confines of the time, et cetera, I would attempt to develop a relationship with the individuals I interviewed. So it wasn't just business. I tried to put a human face on it, and I tried to cultivate and develop relationships. Now, the reason for that is if you're regularly interviewing, which means you're having a conversation, you're having a private conversation, if you will, with some of the most powerful people in the world. And some of these people, the most powerful people in the world, have assets at their fingertips which you could not even begin to imagine. So it is prudent and wise, whenever possible, to develop the kind of relationships that I was referring to within the context of the interview. Why? Because when you create a list of people, their names, their phone numbers, their emails, the date you interviewed them, the topic, any notes you want to take, so you're compiling your own file of contacts at a very high level. And you may end up interviewing some of these people on more than one occasion. But this has potential benefits strategically for the future. One of the benefits is that there are people in very high places that know your name and what you do in a good template, not in a negative template, in a good template. They had a positive, trustworthy experience with you. That's important, especially in the age of AI. Number two is, in a world that if you take a stand for anything good, decent, and positive, you're going to be opposed. You can, without even seeking to, you can You can discover enemies, people who troll you, and all kinds of weird things. So when you have taken the time to create an asset of defense, if you will, if you've taken the time to cultivate an asset of defense by, at whatever level you can, befriending some of these high-level people, like the top general in NORAD, for crying out loud, and others, the mere fact that you have the ability to contact them directly, the mere fact that you have developed whatever kind of relationship you were able to develop, that is a set of resources, it's a set of assets, and it's also a set of defense factors that you can incorporate in your life. Because let's get to the bottom line. If you're not connected to anybody with power, you're vulnerable. You're like a sitting duck. But if you have connections with people of great power, people that can flip a switch, people that can make a phone call and change the world, if you've cultivated a network of relationships at that level, and then you have the particulars regarding them that you would never give or share to anybody, it's like it doesn't exist for all practical purposes. What you have, in a sense, then, is that in front of people who are maybe jealous of you, people that oppose what you believe in, or whatever the situation is, you now have at your disposal, if you'll train yourself to perceive it in a multidimensional way, you have at your disposal people who, to one degree or another, can be contacted or can be relied on to watch your back. In other words, back to our working premise. If you're just all by yourself and you're not connected to anybody, you're essentially a loner. From a strategic standpoint, that makes you vulnerable. If you have spent a lifetime cultivating specific relationships with people of power, enormous power, and you're able to befriend them to whatever degree, you now have at your disposal, just like they have at their disposal, enormous assets, but you now have at your disposal some of the most powerful assets in the world in relationship to the working axiom, people that can be potentially inquired of to watch your back. You see what I'm saying? You now have the existence of an invisible army, if you will, watching your back. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree on certain peripheral issues. What matters is the reality that at some point in space and time, you were able to develop a relationship, converse with this individual, something that some people in the military, for example, people that work way under the top commander, might spend a lifetime networking, schmoozing, going to certain parties or whatever, in an effort to just get into the inner circle, even for a few minutes, of some of these powerful people for the purpose of advancing their career. But you, because you're understanding what God has given you, that's called being thankful. That's called giving thanks in all things. That's called being thankful to God. When you're thankful to God, you're putting your mind in the mental position of being able to understand exactly what it is that God has given you. And now, as a faithful steward that you are able to not only to be faithful to whatever it is the Lord has given you, but you are able to be faithful and to be able to be fruitful and multiply whatever it is that the Lord has given you. So, what you've done in one fell swoop is you've significantly minimized your personal threat level. You've significantly minimized and marginalized any plan of evil that you may not even be aware of the plan of evil, but you have been able to marginalize it by building, if you want to be more blunt, by building strategic alliances with people in very high degrees of power. You have created your own defense fund. And so when you interact with people in a very tumultuous and sometimes challenging society, when you're interacting like that, now people that might think, oh, gee, I can do that or do this or whatever. And I'm not talking about stuff that is of good intent. I'm talking about stuff that would constitute of evil intent. Now these very same people are forced to reevaluate their estimation of your resources. And they realize, especially if you're praying simultaneously, they realize that whatever it is they were concocting, whatever scheme they may have been planning, they realize it is not such an open and shut situation. They realize that it is far more challenging, and they realize that it is far more difficult than they ever conceived it to be. And so what happens? If they have any brains at all, they back off. Oh, they'll never say it publicly, but if they have any brains at all, they will silently back off. They will silently retreat. So, what is this all about? This is far more than simply studying what we're studying, which is of vital importance. But as we study what we're studying, we need to understand that the Lord God, the Supreme Being, is taking this exact opportunity in space and time, this moment, to download into you, to download into me, an amazing set of instructional tools, and tools of not only tools that are transcendent of people skills, but tools that would move into the categories of self-defense, personal defense, and enabling yourself and what you're doing to move forward unhindered. That's what it's all about, isn't it? So that you and I can accomplish the mission that God has called us to accomplish. Okay, now I want to get into this thing with the command structure, so let's get into it. Again, so we're going to continue our deep dive into the geopolitical analysis of Greenland and what the assets of Greenland represents to the United States of America. So we were talking about NATO, and I had the privilege of talking to the top military general in charge of NATO and the Northern Command. And I believe, I could be wrong, I'm going to look it up before I say it on the air, but there's a particular area which is under this command that you would be familiar with. But in any case, this is the key. If World War III was to ever arise, being able to lock down the territories that Greenland can influence in a large way would be absolutely critical. So, for example, as you all know, the America and Communist China are interlocked to a significant degree economically. We buy their products and all kinds of stuff. It's a weird relationship. It's an incestuous relationship. So Greenland has the natural resources that are heavily purchased by America, China, and other nations. So Greenland, again, in that area, as we mentioned before, is a geopolitical asset. So the other thing is controlling, protecting things like Arctic mining, because Communist China is developing investments heavily in Arctic mining because they recognize the value of the natural minerals. So Greenland has a multifaceted importance to the U.S. in that it is a ever-expanding network of assets, which involves global power balances and a continuing spectrum of military readiness. So the U.S. maintains this large military installation on Greenland, which, as we said before, is known as the Pacific Space Base, formerly Thule Air Base. And it is northwest of the Arctic Circle. Now, it's the U.S. Space Force base in the northernmost Department of Defense site. So not only do we have Navy and military and Air Force and all kinds of stuff, but we have U.S. Space Force base, a U.S. Space Force base. And it is located, this Space Force base is located about 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle and only 947 miles away from the North Pole, where Santa Claus and the elves live. So we have about 200 plus U.S. service members that work at this particular base. Now, in addition to that, as we said, this base conducts space surveillance, satellite communications, and this is very interesting, especially in light of all these so-called asteroids and comets that allegedly are coming close to planet Earth, like out of a Hollywood sci-fi movie. So we have this technology, which is we have early warning or we have missile warning. So if one of a nation shoots missiles at America and those missiles are coordinated to fly over the Arctic or fly over Greenland before they hit America, we have missile warning systems in Greenland and the Arctic, and we have near-Earth space monitoring and support for NORAD Northcom missions. That means near-Earth space monitoring means any of these asteroids or comets or whatever that's flying up there in outer space and getting in proximity to planet Earth, we can monitor through NORAD Northcom, and yes, we can shoot it, or depending on the size of the object, if the size is doable, we can shoot it out of the sky or hit it with a laser beam or all kinds of stuff. Remember that movie Armageddon, where this I think it was a comet. Yeah, it was a comet was headed for planet Earth, and they couldn't stop the comet, so they got Bruce Willis, the Hollywood actor, and he flew and landed a rocket on the asteroid in the movie Armageddon, and he was able to detonate or blow into pieces, or at very least move the asteroid out of the trajectory of hitting planet Earth by detonating the nukes that were on the rocket that he landed on the asteroid. So, it's not just Hollywood. This is something that at some point in time could potentially happen, especially if you read Bible prophecy. You see references to things in the book of Revelation, which apparently seem to be describing comets or asteroids possibly hitting planet Earth. So in addition to that, there's a new 2026 base that is being upgraded, and it will have all kinds of super enhancement features like icebreaker capable boats. That means you can travel at high speeds in a large boat, and the boat will have the technology to shatter any ice that is blocking the passage of the boat. New technology. And you have, of course, the oversight of some of the previous U.S. European Command structures has been given over via Trump to the U.S. Northern Command, also known as U.S. Northcom, which integrates Greenland into a homeland defense rather than simply a European military theater, which we were paying for anyway. So, what also we have is we've expanded our Arctic defense role. So the reality is that Russia, in addition to the elite nuclear submarines sent by Russia to secretly spy on us in the Pacific coast and the West Coast, we have what is called the Russian Northern Fleet submarines and the Russian Fleet aircraft, which can move all kinds of military equipment to the North Atlantic very quickly, which potentially threatens U.S. East Coast targets. Now, because the Arctic ice melt is happening even as we speak, melting ice and water is pouring into the sea areas, we have upgraded our defense systems, especially our missile defense systems. And we have all kinds of new treaties with Europe, including the passage of what is called Operation Arctic Endurance, which is going to continue and launch in 2026. And Operation Arctic Endurance involves reconnaissance, satellite and submarine surveillance, infrastructure protection, air-sea deployments of fighter aircraft, and all kinds of stuff that networks nations like France, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Netherlands, UK. So what does this, when you look at this and you do the math for yourself, what do you see? You see a rapidly expanding military, which means people in the know are in prep for, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they're in prep for the potential, not the actuality, the potential of World War III. So that also includes, in addition to what I just talked about, this space missile base, Pacific. It directly supports military command structures like NORAD, U.S. Northcom, and NATO. And they do that through, located on the Arctic and located in Greenland, we have a ballistic missile early warning system, the latest tracking of hypersonic threats and the latest tracking of ICBMs should they be fired by Russia or whoever. We have the space surveillance and control systems, which monitors near-Earth space tracks. We have a vast array of other assets, a deep water port created by the Department of Defense tugboat, the Rising Star, for ice-breaking port operations. I mean, this is like really science fiction-like technology. And that's really the point. That's one of the things we do in the Paul McGUIRE report. It's what I do big time, if you will. As an author, I do continual deep dive research into all kinds of fields and categories of study. Now, what the process always involves, and this is what I try to do for you, the listener. A lot of people don't have the time, the inclination, the resources, or the expertise to do like deep dive research. Because deep dive research requires that you study and review a vast diversity of subjects. Knowing full well, as you're plunging into these categories of research, you know full well that a lot of the research, the material, the facts, the what people are claiming, and so on and so forth, you know going into it that you're going to have to function as kind of a spiritual, intellectual filtering system. You're going to have to be ready to weed out the nonsense, to weed out, things that truly are conspiracy theories, and weed out the lies and half-truths. I would say that anybody who's pursuing research, anybody who's trying to get to the bottom of certain things, you've got to be prepared for not only the high that comes from discovering the truth, the genuine sense of gratification for understanding the truth and communicating it to others, but you also have to be prepared, once again, for going through a filtering process, a weeding out process. Every time, as I look back at the call God has given me, as I look back on this career, which is a strange career, by the way, it's a very high-risk career. When I look back upon it, I can't tell you how many times I would choose a topic to study and research because I believe that when I understood this topic of study, when I researched it adequately, that it would open up all kinds of doors for me into understanding and further understanding vitally needed to know truths, that we would not be able to crack open this dome of confusion, if you will, and get to the bottom line and free our lives, our families, and free our nation unless we had developed a rich intellectual historical foundation based on documented facts. But in order to arrive at all those documented facts, whatever kind of process you want to use as an analogy, they all fit to varying degrees. So if you're somebody who mines or looks for diamonds in a diamond mine, which obviously I've never done, the closest I've ever come to it is watching a movie like Blood Diamonds. The diamond miner has to go through incredible hell, if you will, dirt, and risk suffocation and all kinds of things, and risk their lives to look for diamonds in what is called a diamond mine. It's a filtering out process. The farmer, in order to have fruitful crops, and that includes vegetables and fruits and other things, in order to have bountiful crops, a farmer must regularly pull the weeds out of his crops. So his crops will have the nutrients to grow, corn or whatever the harvest is intended to be. So there's that weeding out process. There's no shortcut. If you start using toxic poisons like Roundup and its other types of poisons, you're going to end up killing people by the millions or making them get all kinds of strange diseases. So weeding out weed-type plants, looking or traveling great distances. All of these things involve a selection process. All of these things require that you scrutinize, that you examine, that you research, and in the process, you know full well, once again, that you're going to have to chuck out, throw out, and reject a whole lot of stuff, no matter how right sounding it may be. You're going to have to reject it because on further examination, you discover it's not historically true. It has never been documented. Another narrative is true, thus disproving the narrative you were looking at. And you have to always get your ego out of the way. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about Jesus Christ, who is the way and the truth and the life. And Jesus is the truth. So it's about discovering the truth in order to set people free. And again, that requires the arduous, often exhausting process of scrutinizing all kinds of content, data, information, rejecting all the lies, the illusion, and the deception, and then coming up with an effectively communicated set of truths based on your research or other people's research that will set people free. That's what it's all about. Now, having said that, in this process, how do you speed up the process? How do you ensure that you are getting accurate information? Well, you have to follow some general guidelines or rules, or otherwise you'll go crazy. You'll go off the plantation. And the general rules you have to follow are, you have to do your due diligence. There's no shortcut in gaining truth historically in a contemporary manner or whatever. You have to go through a research process that involves scrutinization and rejection of falsehoods, and then the acceptance of truths based on documentation, firsthand witnesses, so on and so forth. So that brings us to what can be gained. Well, what can be gained when you discover the truth, like the diamond mine, and even in the movie Blood Diamond, or Diamonds, whatever it was, in the movie and in the whole business, the nasty business of diamond mines, when these miners slave away with risk to their lives to search out for diamonds deep under the earth, the following happens. After a long period, sometimes a very long period of scrutinization and searching, by God's grace and God's leading, you find the diamonds, which in my little narrative here would be symbolic of discovering and finding the truth. You find the diamonds. In the case of the diamond miners, they sell these diamonds to wholesalers and companies, jewel companies like De Beers and other very, very billionaire-oriented, multi-billion dollar companies. And then you sell these diamonds to people all over the world. So the diamond, if we go back to the book of Proverbs, that you're supposed to search after wisdom, you're supposed to hunger and thirst after wisdom, that you're supposed to prioritize looking for wisdom. And then in Proverbs, I'm paraphrasing, but the payoff, according to the book of Proverbs, goes something like this. When you search for wisdom, when you search for knowledge, as you would search for precious jewels like diamonds, then you will have discovered a treasure. It has the diamond has enormous value. So the diamond miner is symbolic of as a researcher or somebody who genuinely seeks the truth. Now, the payoff is the value of the diamonds that can be sold. The payoff for research, which bears witness to the truth, is that you can change a nation. You can change the direction of planet Earth. Just one case in point among millions, potentially. You have to acquire a truthful knowledge of human history. The old adage goes, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. This is so true. When you discover the truth in history, the documented truth about what really happened, not what people want you to believe happened, then you can set other people free with the truth. The greatest case in point would be the fact, and it's an historical, documented, archaeological fact, that every communist, Marxist dictatorship in human history, like communist Russia, communist China, communist Cuba, so on and so forth, communist North Korea, all of these communist nations, because they embraced communism and Marxism, they ended up totally destroying their own people. Poverty was the result. Mass enslavement was the result. Total stripping away of freedoms was the result. The murdering of hundreds of millions of people, so many they have to lie about it in the history books. And so when you find out what the real historical track record is for communism, Marxism, it's always a list of what I call abomination negatives, unbelievable negatives. And so this is the historical fact, the historical proof you need to slam dunk, if you will, into people's minds the truthful, historically verified concept that communism and Marxism is always the road to a total loss of freedoms, living under a total dictatorship, the mass murder of millions, and living in the most unbelievable oppressive society you can imagine. That is always, always, always 100% where communism, Marxism takes any people who are gullible enough to be deceived by it. See, this is why you've got to research and search after the truth. This is why Proverbs calls the value of truth to be like precious jewels, like diamonds, because it has, when you can free people from generations of total slavery and poverty by simply educating them with the truth of what happened versus bombarding their minds with propaganda and lies about what happened, you can save individuals by the billions, and you can save nations all over planet Earth. And so the value, the eternal value of knowledge and wisdom has eternal rewards. Okay, so that's why at Paul McGUIRE Ministries we do what we do. This is why I do the research, I write the books. The research is heavy duty, but I take the research, I compress it in a sense, and then I try to streamline it, and I try to present the truth in as fast a moving format as I possibly can so that people can digest it and assimilate in a fast manner. So when we look at these nations, we look at a fact that the knowledge we gain about them and the historical data we gain about them has a value that is literally priceless. And then when we communicate the lessons of history, the lessons of reality via social media, via videos, radio, books, articles, conferences, church meetings, every means of communication we employ. And when you spread that throughout America, then you can make fundamental changes in America now, and you can hopefully and prayerfully, by the grace of God, reconfigure or transform the potential future of America so that we can occupy until Jesus Christ comes, so that we can win millions of souls to Christ through a vast last day soul harvest. That's what it's all about. And I'd like to remind you, if I can, that by going to paulmcguire.us now, you have the opportunity to donate or contribute or make a financial gift to Paul McGUIRE, the Paul McGUIRE Report at Paradise Mountain Church. That's Paradise Mountain Church International. You can donate right now securely and safely electronically at paulmcguire.us, or you can do it at the address given to you at paulmcguire.us. Okay, let's continue to take a deep dive in searching out the truth. So I regularly have to research all kinds of areas and then put the data on a kind of shelf, or file it in my mind, or file it with my notes, or file it in multiple computers. And many of them, I have spent many topics. Okay, so let's give you an idea of what a potential topic might be for me. Okay, so let's take one that's very much on people's minds, but really out there potentially. And that would be, has planet Earth been visited by aliens from other planets? Has planet Earth been visited by UFOs and aliens from other planets? Now that's huge. But because it's huge, there's so much misinformation and disinformation to go along with it. So I have researched the area of aliens and UFOs for many, many decades. But basically, in a public sense, I put that information in various files that I have because I'm not yet comfortable in my spirit and in my identity as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm not yet comfortable with announcing any assessment or conclusion because it's still a work in progress. In other words, I don't like to come out and say something unless I am convinced that that is what the facts bear witness to. So to me, the concept of aliens and UFOs, I haven't shut the door on it, but neither have I opened the door up, so to speak, and believed everything in these alien UFO accounts. And what I'm looking for is more credible evidence, more proof, more documentation that I can use to either clarify my position and make my position a solid negative and reject it because it's not based on facts, or, again, I don't have an ego involvement in it, or I would be presented with facts and data and truths that would provide a absolutely strong case for the reality of Earth being visited by aliens, ETs, and UFOs over thousands of years. Because the amount of discussion is astronomical on this topic. But I must tell you, and maybe you've discovered this yourself, there's a ton. There's, hundreds of millions of pieces of information, videos, photographs, testimonies, and everything else they just don't ring true, and there doesn't appear to be any substantial documentation. Now, normally, a lot of people would just throw that topic out and say it's just a bunch of nonsense. But I have to I have to operate with as much integrity as I can. So I don't throw that topic out, because in the counterbalance, there's a massive amount of believable testimonies, apparently credible testimonies, credible facts, credible firsthand accounts that kind of balance out all the negatives. So the only way I can come to a conclusion is to store all this information, continue to pray about it, continue to do research, and believe that God will send my way the facts that I need to make a clear analysis in one direction or another. And so there are many things that I've been researching, many categories of research that I've been doing that have gone on for, decades or 30 or 40 years. And I assemble all the data I can, but I have not yet come to a conclusion. And it's only when I get the facts and documentation, it has to be to such an overwhelming degree that I would be comfortable in making a kind of final analysis and then releasing it. Because you see, it is these categories, like the potential of aliens and UFOs, it's these kind of weird categories that are they're simultaneously categories of research, but simultaneously they are the battlegrounds for psychological and spiritual warfare on many, many levels. And I'll explain what I mean. As I wrote in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and some of my other books, like Power from On High, I talk about the famous intelligence agency propaganda reports and propaganda experiments on the mass public of the United States of America. In particular, when the intelligence agencies hired a famous actor in that day, Orson Welles, and this was in the day of when people were all fixated around radio. So this was pre-internet, pre-television, okay? So Orson Welles, who was a very famous actor, they would regularly do all across America radio plays or radio dramas. If you've ever heard one of these, they're really amazingly good. And they would draw in millions of listeners. So anyway, they did a special radio drama, and I talk about all the details in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. They hired Orson Welles to do a major radio drama production entitled Invaders from Mars. And the whole idea of the radio drama play was every person functioned as an actor in the play, and they acted in a play as if alien UFOs had landed in America from the planet Mars. So in this radio drama, America was being invaded by aliens flying UFOs that were from the planet Mars, and they were in the process. These alien invaders were in the process of killing millions of Americans with the intent of totally enslaving humanity, enslaving all the Americans, and taking over or conquering the world. Now, at the beginning, and this is a several-hour radio drama, at the beginning of the radio drama, because it was broadcast live with millions of people tuning in instantly, they gave a brief audio disclaimer at the very beginning of the program, which announced that the following radio drama is purely fictional. It's not real, and it's simply a dramatic depiction of what would happen if aliens invaded America and planet Earth. So that was their disclaimer. It was a legally required disclaimer. They issued it so anybody paying attention would have realized that they were watching a drama, not the news. But the people that produced and wrote and acted in this radio drama, they knew exactly what they were doing. As I tell you in my book, this was an official project of the Princeton University's radio propaganda department, which was financed by U.S. military and the branches that were responsible for what is known as PSYOPs, or psychological warfare. So this entire radio drama of a Martian alien invasion was, at its bare bones facts, a radio propaganda project produced by Princeton University's radio propaganda department. And the best-selling book was released along with it, explaining the psychological manipulation. But it was an experiment by the U.S. government in mass propaganda. And they knew going into it that even though they made a special announcement where they alerted the audience that what the audience was hearing was not real, but part of a radio drama, they knew, the producers knew, the writers knew, that people have this amazing tendency to believe what they want to believe. They knew full well that the people in America would basically ignore the warning label, and they would believe that this thing was a real nitty-gritty invaders from Mars. The Martian armies have come through UFOs to take down America and the world. They knew that the majority of people, the overwhelming majority of people watching this, hearing this radio drama would fall into that category. And they were counting on it. So what happened as the minutes and hours went by of this radio drama, people were freaking out all across America, from one coast to another, all across the Midwest. People were panicking. There were police sirens, sirens, fires being started. There was lawlessness, looting, chaos. People were going crazy because of fear. They were going ballistic because of the fear of, my God, because there'd be these really gross but very journalistic sounding of minute descriptions of the terrifying appearance of these aliens from Mars. And it was so realistic but so frightening at the same time. And then these weird spaceships that move with like octopus tentacles, crawling across, very, very tall, but moving across farmlands and city streets, and just weird stuff went on. And America was totally freaking out. America was on the receiving end of a mass psychotic breakdown. And yes, in terms of a PSYOP, psychological operation, in terms of Princeton Radio's radio propaganda department, this was a home run experiment in the power of effective psychological operations and the power of waging war on any given population via radio propaganda with made-up, manufactured narratives. They wanted to do like a beta test of how the American people would react, and the American people acted exactly like everybody thought they would act, which they believed that the American people would believe it was true, disregard the warning, and essentially go ballistic with fear as these, weird descriptions of giant Martian soldiers commanding UFOs and slaughtering human beings, moving all across the country. I mean, they thought it was Doomsday USA, for crying out loud. So it effectively proved the power of propaganda. Now, had there been alternative sources of media broadcasting the truth, had there been an internet, had there been TV, had there been a counter offensive to the propaganda, then the truthful knowledge, the truthful facts could have been presented to the American people. And by hearing the truth and by receiving knowledge rather than just paranoia, that would have destroyed the effectiveness of this propaganda experimentation. That would have reduced the PSYOPs down to absolutely nothing. It's amazing when truth is communicated to the public marketplace of ideas and thoughts. Truth can set people free. The people in America didn't have to be in a perpetual state of freakout regarding giant Martian soldiers invading America. The hysteria, the shutdown of society, the rioting, the looting, all that stuff happened because people had no they had only one opportunity, which is a lie was cleverly presented to them, and they believed the lie. Now, you don't, no pun intended, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure the following out. Whoever controls the mass media, whoever controls mainstream media, whoever controls alternative media, and alternative media is just as much under control as mainstream media. If you believe that alternative media is some truth-telling mechanism, if you believe alternative media and the alternative media stars, if you will, are the truth tellers, then you have been sucker punched far harder than you think. The alternative media and the superstars of the alternative media are just as much under the thumb of the Big Brother Orwellian forces as are the mainstream media stars and the mainstream media. Think of the paradigm symbolically before your eyes. Look at it in a visual sense. On one hand, you have this category created secretly by the intelligence agencies. It's called, and the whole thing that's bombarding you and everybody you know right now, and bombarding every Christian you know, and every conservative and liberal you know, what's bombarding all of them is a variety of high-powered psyops, psychological operations. The essential psyops that is being waged against us right now in America is you have two completely artificial, synthetic categories of communication. On one hand, you have the category of mainstream media in social media, video, radio, television, etc., etc. Mainstream media is widely known as the corporate-controlled, corporate-financed, official propaganda arm of the government, the intelligence agencies, and basically the mainstream media represents not the people, but it represents the system, okay? And everybody knows it's fake. By now they know it's fake. They didn't know it was fake 10 years ago. That's one category. And a lot of people have left that category as a potential source for truth. But the other separate category is a category that the intelligence agencies and other heads of psyops invented. The other category is called alternative media. Now, alternative media and mainstream media are controlled by the same think tanks. They're controlled by the same intelligence agencies. They are controlled by the same money interests. Got it? When I say got it, it should be like, football stadium lights all go on in your brain. Bam! Football stadium lights just illuminate your brain. You fall out of the chair because you can see everything clearly. Everything clearly, like maybe it's the first time you ever did see it clearly. And this is what I'm trying to tell you. The two categories, mainstream media and alternative media, are both, in the truest sense of the word, they are both psychological operations designed to fool the American people. So you have certain demographics that are attracted to the mainstream media, but it's all lies. And then you have certain demographics that are attracted to the alternative media. But here's the shocker. What most conservatives, Christians, and many, many other demographic groups of people, what they don't understand is that alternative media is just as much a Big Brother Orwellian operation. It's just as much a psyop, psychological operation, as mainstream media. It's just the ruse that they're using on you. The hustle that they're hustling with you is they have manufactured the illusion. They have manufactured an artificial truth, an illusion of truth, which says, oh, you can trust alternative media. You can trust conservative alternative media, and you certainly can trust the stars of alternative media because they're kind of funky and earthy just like you. They're shooting straight. They're not overly manufactured. They're not wearing, $6,000-$7,000 suits. But they do. But look closely. Many of them, the top tier of the social media stars, the top tier of the alternative media stars, they have very, very nice mansions, just like the people in mainstream media. And at the very top level, the superstars of alternative media, look again very carefully. Look again, and what do you see? They have, the superstars of alternative media, they have two
gigantic palatial mansions, and they live a very, very elegant life. So what does that tell you? Follow the money. That they're really not alternative because you don't make millions and millions of dollars a year. You are not allowed in America to reach and communicate to millions and millions of people on a regular basis unless you have signed the deal. If you've secretly signed the deal, then the doors open and the money flows. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, you do. I know you do. In fact, I swear on it. I know that you know what I'm talking about. So you got to look carefully. And you got to understand that they're simply running a psyops through both the mainstream media and they're running a psyops simultaneously through the alternative media. That's what it's all about. And look with more scrutinization. Look with more critical analysis. Look with more enhanced perception at the people and what they're saying in alternative media. And what do you find? You find them playing the same old psyops games, psychological operations, that they used to play and that they still play through mainstream media for many decades, starting with the alleged assassination of President John F. Kennedy in broad daylight, and then blamed it on a guy who was not all there and wasn't that great of a shot. And every military man I've ever talked to said, no matter how great a marksman you were, there's no way that Oswald, the alleged assassin of John F. Kennedy, could have assassinated Kennedy with that rifle that he had, which was not an accurate rifle. Very few people could have made that shot, if any, and certainly Oswald didn't make it. But that disappears. The fog machine, just like a rock and roll concert from the 60s or 70s, when they turn on the fog machine and they bathe the fog in red, blue, green, yellow lights stroboscopically, well, guess what? Anything you could see underneath the fog disappears. So certain people and agencies turned on the fog machine and people forgot all these little truths. All these little truths. So today, you got millions of Christians that have little or no spiritual discernment because they really don't have the Holy Spirit inside them. They don't renew their minds with the Word of God, so they don't have the mind of Christ, and they can't perceive, and they don't know the basics of analysis and discerning whether or not something is true or not. They have lost those critical thinking abilities. And so, as the Who sang in their rock and roll song, and I'm going to mutilate the lyrics, but they had one, for those of you that are younger, once upon a time, the Who, played in stadiums everywhere. They were the guys that first, and they were really good musicians, so they weren't a bunch of fools going up there. So the Who was the first rock band that they would, after their performance, I think it was live on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was like this giant black and white, I think it was black and white back then, massively high ratings, millions and millions of Americans watched the shows. And while they're doing this incredible performance, in the crescendo of the ending of the song by the Who, the various musicians in the Who, like Peter Townsend, they picked up their guitars and they would smash their guitars, their electrical guitars. They would smash the electrical guitars in their hands. They'd smash them to pieces with feedback going off, everywhere. And it was like, it became cheesy later on, but the first group out of the gate to do it was the Who, so they got away with it. And they had some lyrics in some song that went, it was where Peter Townsend is singing about, he's going to take his hat off for the new revolution. That was the word back then. The whole counterculture was singing about the need for a counterculture revolution. So in the lyrics of Peter Townsend's song, he's singing something like, I take my hat off for the new revolution. And then there's a lyric that comes up where Townsend sings, meet the new boss, the same as the old boss. And there's like, the electrical guitars like explode with the music. So what Townsend is saying in that song, he's tipping his hat for the way he and other rock stars were like promoting the revolution, the counterculture revolution. And then, a couple of beats later, Townsend sings into the microphone and he's trying to make a point to the worldwide audience listening to them via all the media. Townsend says, meet the new boss, which basically means, okay, you had your revolution, now meet the new president, meet the new boss of America and the world. And you're all thrilled because you think that your new boss is the product of your philosophy and your revolutionary ideas. So Townsend sings again, meet the new boss. And then he sings, same as the old boss. So Townsend is saying, the new boss that you just installed with your revolution is the same in his belief systems, in his heart, as the corrupt old boss. Nothing's changed. So Townsend is saying, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. He's saying, sober up, fools, wake up and smell the coffee. You're getting conned again. And then Townsend sings the famous lyric, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And then he yells, but melodically with a powerful vocal, I pray we won't get fooled again. Brown. That's my very terrible mouth for electronic synthesizer. So you get it. Meet the old boss, same as the new boss. I pray we won't get fooled again. So he's saying to the audiences, the Woodstock generation and everybody else, don't be so blanking naive. You're being played once again. It's just, now your new boss dresses a little bit like a hippie. His hair, presidential haircuts are longer, but basically his core beliefs, he's just as corrupt. Your new counterculture boss leader is just as corrupt as the old boss. So it's a warning to the naive counterculture not to be fooled again. And why are they not fooled again? Because if they had access to the truth, if they had access to knowledge which grants power, you wouldn't get fooled again. So taking it back full cycle, the most important thing you can do, and the communists know this in the negative, when you analyze, which I have in my books, I explain to you the techniques, I list the principles of how a communist Marxist revolution occurs in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, Volume 1. And in that book, I hammer home the message and I list all the bullet point goals of communists and Marxists working in America today to overthrow America and install a Marxist revolutionary state, because that's their goal. It's financed by the international bankers. So what I try to communicate is that what I learned by studying the methodology of communist and Marxist revolutions is that it was very simple. How they went, first of all, they have the invisible hand of help from the billionaire, trillionaire bankers, because it's the billionaire, trillionaire bankers like Rockefeller that have been secretly funding the communist Marxist revolutions all around the world for, over 100 years. Nobody knows that. They don't teach you that in school. They don't want you to know that, because then it would be meet the new boss, the same as the old boss. The money's coming from the same place, the billionaire, trillionaire class. So when you read their strategy, I was shocked by how simple it was. They simply believe in the following. They use every means of communication at their disposal to sell the public, to sell individuals on the incredible benefits of communism and Marxism. And then they use every form of communication at their disposal to indoctrinate people into a whole system of lies, which brainwashes people into thinking capitalism, Christianity, the American way of life, and all of that is nothing more than a slavery oppression system. But this is how they do it. Here's the nuts and bolts. They spread their viewpoint. They spread their information through books, pamphlets, social media, films, documentary films, artwork, paintings, sculptures, episodic TV, every means of communication, every means of social media, video, you name it, handing out leaflets in the street, handing out books, having authors write books, having those books distributed. So they saturate people's minds with an avalanche of communication, which basically brainwashes people into believing the lie that communism is going to bring about some kind of paradise on earth. So Christians were naive. You go back 90 years ago, Christians were asleep, while the communist youth movements and the communists were diligent to be doing this on every college campus, on street corners all over America. The Christian culture, the conservative culture, did in the beginning and did in certain decades, they did attempt to whatever degree to promote a biblical Christian worldview
belief system to their fellow Americans. They did, to a limited degree, try to spread the truth of the gospel of Christ and win souls to Jesus Christ. So in certain areas, Christians were very aggressive and very much ahead of everybody else in terms of utilization of the media. Unfortunately, the lack of integrity and a certain craziness entered the Christian culture. And so what God allowed, like television evangelism and Christians on TV and stuff, it was supposed to be a communication win. It was supposed to be a way to reach untold millions with the biblical truth. But because it was not put in the hands of good stewards, because it was not everybody, but a significant number of the television evangelists, not all, but a significant number of them fell into scandal, horrible scandal. And then there was such a lack of integrity in terms of communication style and monetary or fiscal responsibility that the presence of Christians on television actually became more of a negative than a positive. The communist movement never needed television. I mean, they took control over the networks, don't get me wrong. Today, while the Christians were waving the flag to their enemies and saying, we're coming to get you, the communists moved in a stealth manner. They silently took over motion picture studios and television networks and news networks and social media and internet communication platforms. And they have totally taken over by stealth the curriculum of colleges, high schools, grammar schools, universities, so that this is how evil the communists are. But you see, they're evil, but they're not stupid. Let's revisit that really quick. The communist, Marxist, Antichrist movement is very evil, but it's not stupid. It's not stupid. All 8 cylinders are functioning. And when they pedal to the metal, they burn rubber. They go somewhere. So while Christians have allowed themselves, through their apathy, the Christian movement, the Christian leaders and individual Christians have literally allowed themselves to be mocked, made fun of, demonized, and portrayed as fools, perverts, and imbeciles on every media, like, Saturday Night Live, every comedy, every film. It's a constant bombardment of messages that are super negative about Christians and born-again Christians specifically. And the only reason that anti-Christian barrage exists is because every other group in America has no conflict with standing against people who are attempting to marginalize them, demonize them, lie about them, portray them as imbeciles and psychotics and perverts and really nasty stuff. Every group in America, whether it's Muslim or Scientologists, you could name any group you wanted in America, the gay movement, transgender movement, and even a whole assortment of non-sexual type movements. If you try to attack them and disgrace them and demonize them and make them look like idiots, and if you're unfair in branding them, they say enough is enough. In fact, that is the exact words from the days of the beginning days of the gay rights movement. They said enough is enough. Well, guess what? Christians have never uttered with their mouths, enough is enough. They've never drawn a line in the sand and stood up against those that are trying to destroy them. Let's review very quickly and succinctly the formula for destroying and wiping out any given group or individual from the face of the earth. You follow this formula and it's guaranteed that you will wipe out any targeted group or individual. You'll wipe them out off the face of the earth. Number 1, demonize them, make fun of them, mock them in every media you can, whether it's movies, television, internet, comedy shows, comedy movies, public speeches, comedy speeches. You make fun of, you make them the laughing objects, you make them images of disgust and repulsion. This is exactly step by step what Adolf Hitler and his Nazi generals and Nazi propagandists did in Nazi Germany. The reason they were able to kill about 35 million Jews and others in Nazi Germany with nobody protesting it, nobody believing it was even happened. The reason the Nazis got away with it is because they had previously, before they began to arrest the Jews and others and send them to the concentration camps and burn the Jews alive and suffocate the Jews in poison gas in the gas chambers
and the ovens of the concentration camps. The reason the Nazis got away with it was because they used this formula. First, before they began the mass slaughter and the mass extinction of Jews and others, they first demonized the Jews, made the Jews the objects of laughter and ridicule, made the Jews objects of hatred to the people through constant repetitive negative images about Jews, constant repetitive images and slogans, cartoons, movies, cartoons and newspapers. So Hitler was busy programming the German Nazis and the young German Nazis. He was programming them to be desensitized to the Jews, to view the Jews as non-human, to view the Jews as deserving it, to view the Jews as some kind of insect or cockroach. This is sophisticated propaganda. When you use the machinery of propaganda to rebrand any given people as less than human, and worse than that, when you rebrand the people like the Jews as being non-human, what you do is you unleash the storms of human prejudice, which is in every one of our souls. You unleash the storms of human prejudice, and you liberate a normally self-restrained person like a Christian. You perform a satanic inner liberation where they can participate wholeheartedly in the rounding up of Jews in Nazi Germany, the gassing of the Jews to death, the burning of the Jews to death in the ovens, and nobody feels anything in their conscience. They're not bothered by it. In fact, they've given themselves over so deeply to a reprobate mind that they do it and they laugh and they think it's a good thing. And you say, well, that would never happen in America. How stupid can you possibly be to say to me that would never happen in America? How can you say it to me? Take the issue of abortion. The baby in the mother's womb, without question, is a precious baby. Anybody who's given birth, anybody who's seen a baby in a birthing room or after the baby is born, babies are cute and cuddly, their eyes sparkle, they are human through and through, and they represent the image of their mother and father, and they're made in the image of God. Babies are a gift from God. They're beautiful, they're innocent, and they're absolutely human even before they're born. That means it doesn't matter what these so-called Nazi-esque experts say. Even before the baby is born, the baby is adorable and the baby is fully human. However, Planned Parenthood, using Nazi propaganda techniques, knows that once you brainwash millions of girls and millions of Americans to think of babies in the womb as non-human, and the way you do this is through systematic mind control. So what you do is you create a new word. You get rid of the term baby, and baby as being human. You remove that term baby or human baby from the minds of millions of women. And you remove the human term baby from the minds of women, from the collective memory of the culture. And instead, you replace the term baby, which worked just fine for, millions and millions of years on planet Earth. You remove the word baby, and now you replace it with this word, fetus. Nobody heard of the word fetus before the propagandists in the pro-abortion movement created it. Once you begin through systematic scientific brainwashing and what is known as psychological operations or psyops, you can program people to now perceive that what they used to believe was a baby, what was once called a baby in a girl's womb or a woman's womb, as she's getting up to the place to give birth, you now reprogram people and women, and you create a new term called fetus. So it's no longer a baby that's in the mother's womb. It's now called a fetus, which is in the mother's womb. Thus, when your subconscious mind encounters the word fetus, listen carefully here. I'm not being pedantic. I'm trying to share with you a secret key to unlocking a very deep and profound understanding about how subtle brainwashing propaganda is and how powerfully it can work in a matter of seconds. Listen carefully with me. Once you replace the word baby with the psyop term fetus, every time the prospective mother, every time somebody in society, every time an article is published, anytime there's a discussion or a debate regarding abortion, people have been programmed to not consider a baby in the womb or that the mother's giving birth to a baby. They've been propagandized, they've been brainwashed through scientific mind control to actually believe in a new mythology in which that baby is now called a fetus. So through repetitive hearing and speaking of the word fetus, fetus gets lodged in the subconscious mind of the girl or woman who's going to have a baby. Not consciously all the time, but subconsciously, she begins to perceive of her baby as merely being a fetus. Now, a lot of this is happening in the subconscious mind. A lot of this takes place below the layers of the surface of the mind. A lot of this transformation of branding is taking place on a deep subconscious level. So, if and when a prospective mother or girl succumbs to the propaganda and to the mind control and decides for whatever reason that she is going to have an abortion, normally, especially if it's a Christian or a conservative girl, normally there would be an internal resistance or a strong moral conflict to having an abortion. That's normally. But when you subject somebody to scientific mind control, you can erase the normal and replace it with a new message, just like advertising does. So, when a girl or society repeatedly hears the word fetus instead of baby, on the subconscious level, the girl, society, and a mother who's about to give birth or talk about a baby or whatever, on the subconscious level, deep, deep down inside their inner mind, everyone that's involved in this, including the mothers of prospective babies, the subconscious is now calling and labeling what it used to call a baby. The subconscious of the mother is now calling it, and I'm using it for illustrative purposes. The subconscious mind is now calling it the fetus. It's calling it, and it's calling it a fetus. So this will not necessarily make sense to you in your conscious mind, because something can be completely irrational, completely crazy, completely insane in the level of your rational mind. But if you go take the down elevator into the area of your subconscious mind, oddly enough, it will make total clear sense to your subconscious mind. So there's like a schism. Your conscious mind thinks this is all crazyville. Your subconscious mind sees it as a peaceful, unified, non-sinful choice. So now the inner woman that's ready to give birth, the inner woman is no longer in conflict. The inner woman no longer feels guilt. The inner woman is now released in a positive sense to abort her baby still in her womb. There's no conflict. Why? Because surgically, the propaganda experts have surgically removed the word or term baby from the subconscious of the mother. So the mother no longer feels guilty about choosing to get rid of a fetus. She no longer feels guilty about getting rid of a fetus or aborting a fetus. In fact, the word abortion will also be removed. So what's happening now in the language of the subconscious, because this is where the battle is really raging, in the language of the subconscious mind, the prospective mother or the would-be mother who's pregnant, she's no longer pregnant with a baby. She's now pregnant with a fetus. And she's no longer going to get an abortion. She's going to exercise her free choice. She's going to be pro-choice. So she's not carrying, the prospective mother is no longer carrying a baby. She's carrying a fetus. The prospective mother is no longer planning to have an abortion. The prospective mother is simply going to exercise free choice or pro-choice. So the prospective mother has a fetus in her, and she's going to be pro-choice. Now see how that feels? Even you or me, and I'm male, and most of you aren't pregnant, but even as we're just like play talking this whole thing through, you can feel a far lighter psychological feeling when you say the words fetus or pro-choice or free choice instead of saying, the tougher words that are truthful. So you've cleared a psychological pathway for millions of women to exercise their free choice regarding whatever it is in their wombs. They're not getting an abortion. They're simply being pro-choice and free choice, and they're simply being part of the free choice or pro-choice. And so there are no negative connotations being spoken. The language of the subconscious has been satisfied. So when the pressure is turned up, because pressure is always turned up when it comes to pregnancy, when the pressure is turned up, we think naively, because we haven't really learned the nature of the spiritual battlefield, we think that by holding up protest signs, abortion is murder. I understand the intentions of the people doing that. But the goal is not to be, the goal is to be effective and strategic. The goal is not to just communicate animosity and judgment. And now, look, I get it. You weren't intending to communicate animosity and judgment. I understand that. You had a much purer heart than that. I understand that, but they don't understand that because you're not sophisticated enough in using spiritual weapons. So this entire battle that we're facing, any given conflict in America and the world today that has to do with biblical principles, Jesus Christ, heaven, hell, and the whole deal, there's a primary battlefield in the invisible realm, the spiritual world. And unless we understand the dynamics of this, we're not going to be able to be victorious, and God wants us to be victorious. That is our goal at Paul McGUIRE Ministries. That is our goal at Paradise Mountain Church International. Join us. Help us. The more technology and the more power we can harness to communicate this message far and wide, the more effective we'll be in saving our nation, saving your children and grandchildren. It can be done, but it's done by Holy Spirit, mind of Christ, from a biblical worldview approach. This is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.